Hello and welcome. I am Kristen Campbell-Reed. I am the Executive Director of the Genentech Foundation and lead corporate and employee giving there. And I'm thrilled to kick us off. I'm joined today by just a stellar panel of leaders in the housing and homelessness space, and I'm excited for the conversation to come. There is no question that the world has changed. And also that the challenges in many ways have stayed very much the same. The pandemic has exacerbated existing injustice and inequity across all of our systems, right? Healthcare, education, economic stability, and critically here in California, really around issues related to housing and homelessness. And over the past 2 years, this experience has also really laid bare the longstanding injustices that underpin that and sensitized, and I think this is a good thing, sensitized a broader swath of the public, including corporations, to the experience and the needs of BIPOC communities. But I think we all know that that heightened awareness is just not enough. And that there is tremendous opportunity for corporations to be more precise in naming racism as the driver of inequity and to be much bolder and more focused in our responses. So today, right, as we're pushing towards normalcy, I think sometimes that feels like that's happening in a halting, 2 steps forward, 1 step back way, and sometimes it feels like a rush. But we're in a moment of fragile opportunity for reflection. And I'm thrilled that today we have this incredible panel to tackle this conversation. So I'm going to just do quick introductions and then we're going to get to it. I am joined by Ruby Bolaria Schifrin, who is Director of Housing Affordability Program at the Chan Zuckerberg Institute. And prior to CZI, Ruby worked in roles dedicated to housing affordability and quality in San Francisco and Johannesburg, South Africa, amongst other things. I'm joined by Jennifer Loving, Chief Executive Officer at Destination Home. So many of you know so many of the folks. I mean, I think everybody may know everyone on this panel. Jennifer has spent her career spearheading efforts to better serve the needs of homeless individuals in Silicon Valley and is Senior Fellow of the American Leadership Forum and on the board of Silicon Valley at Home. And last but not least, we have Cindy Wu joining us, Executive Director of Bay Area LISC, where she oversees local programs that are focused on affordable housing, on economic development, on health, on community safety and jobs. And prior to LISC, Cindy served as the executive director of the Chinatown CDC. So one quick housekeeping note before we get to it. If you have questions, we're going to have an open and ranging conversation, and we want to address the questions that are on your mind. So folks in the audience, I keep finding myself saying folks out there in the room, that's not actually happening here, but folks on the line and in the audience, if you have questions, throw them into the chat, and I will do my best to incorporate them into the conversation. So with that preface, I think maybe we can start, guys, with a kind of quick, in case you missed it, catch up to just orient us. And so perhaps each of you want to take a crack at really sharing what are the perhaps 1 or 2 most pressing issues or opportunities today around housing and homelessness, and how have those been shaped by the past 18 months? And I'll actually ask each panelist to give an answer based on the experience of their organization here. Who wants to start?
I can start. I'll do like kind of a more broad, because I have a little bit more of a
Super
ecosystem view. Yeah. So at CZI, just as a quick precursor, we work on housing affordability so people from all backgrounds and incomes can live and thrive in California. And we focus on a 3P approach, right? We need to produce more housing across income levels. We need to protect tenants and residents, and we need to preserve existing housing. And it's through this kind of all of the above approach that we can rebuild our housing system. So during the pandemic, some of the things that we saw and how that shifted is it just exacerbated some of the inequalities that were already there, right? So the systemic racial and economic inequalities within our housing system have really worsened. Frontline essential workers, many of whom come from communities of color, were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, right? And job loss is related to that. Countless tenants and homeowners were on the verge of displacement, especially in light of the eviction moratorium getting overturned. And so a lot of groups are preparing for that, eviction tsunami, as people are calling it. And it feels like it's a little bit of a, getting resources in the right hands has been a challenge. Another impact that we saw of the pandemic is, and kind of we're afraid about, is the corporate buyout of distressed properties. And this potentially decreases the amount of naturally occurring affordable housing, which is actually the #1 way low-income people get housed. And also this stock tends to be owned by mom and pop owners that are being forced to consider to sell, or kind of getting predatory buying offers. And so one of the things that we did is actually start a program in Los Angeles that's focused on stabilizing mom and pop landlords and their tenants, with the goal of preserving these NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing sites. And it's a pilot in South Los Angeles, but we hope to kind of expand if we can demonstrate that it works. There's also more awareness about the intersectionality between homelessness, housing, public health, and racial justice. And since housing insecurity can have a direct impact on COVID, we've seen, I think, a lot of folks connect the dots in more efficient ways. One grantee, I think, that really does this well is Bar High, the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative. I rarely remember acronyms, so that was right. But they focus on that intersection of public health and housing justice, and I think have done a really great job of kind of being a rallying cry for the region on this need. And then just one thing I'll say, and then pass it off, but just to put in perspective in terms of how things are getting exacerbated, 50% of all homeless families in the US identified as African-American before the pandemic. In that same vein, unemployment rate for Black and Latino workers has continued to rise over the past year due to the pandemic-related job loss that's concentrated in communities of color. So I think it's unfortunate in some ways, right, that the problems are getting worse, but I think on the kind of potentially silver lining side, I think people are coming together in a more collaborative way that just wasn't seen before, kind of across issue areas and silos, and want to have this kind of all in, we have to solve this together mentality.
I'll pick it up from there. We've been working very closely with Ruby on the Partnership for the Bay's Future. First, I want to say all three of you on this panel, I'm so happy to be here. You've all been instrumental in the Partnership for the Bay's Future, so it's great to be here as a group. For those in the audience who might be unfamiliar with LISC, we're a Community Development Financial Institution, CDFI. I like to describe our work as facilitating the creation of community-centered agendas and then driving investment to those agendas. We work broadly in affordable housing and economic development and play many roles: investor, technical assistance provider, convener, advocate. So I mentioned the Partnership for the Bay's Future. It's a cross-sector collaboration that holds a dual strategy. It's a policy fund to influence legislation to protect tenants and increase affordability, and a real estate strategy. And here at LISC, we hold that real estate strategy in a family of loan funds that is designed to be part of a more racially inequitable Bay Area. And picking up on this theme of intersectionality, the opportunity we saw in the pandemic was to double down and to hold the goals of volume, adding more homes to the market, at the same time as being really specific about the racial equity goals that we aspire to. In addition to the number of units we were financing, it was about being intentional, about supporting Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous developers, about furthering the investment into preservation projects, NOAA projects, if you will, helping developers acquire buildings and introduce rent restrictions for these buildings where previously there were none. And in new construction, it was about calling out a specific piece of the fund, $150 million of our $500 million goal, to be dedicated to extremely low income individuals and families. So those who are making 30% of area median income and below. And so it's doubling down on all of these goals after all of the initial work to create the partnership for the Bay's future in response to the pandemic. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jen with Destination Home. We work primarily in the South Bay and work to end and prevent homelessness in normal times. So we were already involved in homelessness prevention and providing direct cash assistance to families. And in February 2020, I think our budget for that year was to help about 2,000 families. And by March, the end of March, we'd had 28,000 requests for help. And so we saw a very dramatic scale of, as everybody's jobs shut down, and even the inability to make that April payment. And so we joined forces with about 70 nonprofit organizations to distribute about $70 million in direct cash aid. And then that has turned into financial assistance and rent relief as once the recovery money was flowing and things were available. And the whole strategy was to target ELI households, which ended up being about 95% BIPOC households were the recipients of this funding in Santa Clara County, and ended up really mirroring the zip codes where COVID transmission was really the highest. And so why that was important was we felt like a grassroots effort of really capitalizing organizations on the ground to provide resources to their community, to who they knew was hurting, was our best shot. And so and you know, our main focus was really we already have throughout the Bay 2 to 3 people become homeless for every 1 person that gets out. And so really our goal has been to keep more families and more individuals from entering into homelessness. And so, you know, between moratoriums, between rent relief, between different programs like the one I'm describing, you know, I think there was been a really tremendous effort. But the question now is, now that these protections are expiring, what's going to happen? Thank you.
I want to pick up on this concept of sort of doubling down, Cindy, that you raised. And I think, you know, Jen, that stat of just an increase from 2,000 households to 28,000 over the space of a month and a half really also, I think, illustrates how quickly things shifted and this deep need. You know, in lots of areas, we've seen the way in which the pandemic has sort of forced everyone to throw out the rule book on everything. And that's been challenging and problematic in some places. And I think in other places, and I'm thinking just, you know, an example that probably many of us in the room, we were just chatting before we came in here about our, you know, our home setups, right? This we no longer have to have workers, you know, at work to know that they're at work, right? So that's just a total shift. I'm curious as to the ways in which that doubling down, Cindy, that you described also maybe involved throwing out the rules that we had operated by before or trying new things, and whether you might have, you know, any of you examples that you want to pick up on, some bright spots of innovation that we're seeing.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit more about this fund, the Community Housing Fund. So Jen, really thanks to your advocacy also. Like I said, $150 million was dedicated to individuals and families who are extremely low income. In San Mateo County, one of the 5 counties we work in, that's just under $47,000 a year for a family of 3. And so we were able to say, this is a place where we want to make it easier, faster, more efficient to build affordable housing and get units to the market faster. And so we were able to negotiate really low cost and flexible monies from our major partner, Facebook. Destination Home, you made a sizable donation that enabled us to do that and really push the boundary of what CDFI lending products could be. This is more flexible than anything LISC has done across the country. So we're one of 37 sites within the LISC network. And so really leading the way across the nation about what could be done. Overall in the partnership, we've been able to finance 2,600 units in the last 2 years, and we want to keep being sharp about where the need is. We are really blessed in the Bay Area to have this sophisticated, affordable housing community And they have actually a lot of sources for financing for projects. So where can we find a particular niche, as we've done in the Community Housing Fund, and work with corporations, foundations, and governments to keep doing this, making it easier, faster, and less costly to build?
So really pulling, I hear you talking about the need to pull forward those things that happened because of pandemic into better practices and flexibility moving forward. Does anybody else want to take a crack at, things that your organization has been able to do that are new and promising, perhaps, for where we need to go?
I would say that something that I think that has been important, and not just in Santa Clara County, but happening, I know, at some scale in San Mateo County, has really been the shift of providing, which just seems like the most obvious thing in the world, but just direct cash assistance to families. There's federal resources. In fact, what came through the pandemic, especially at the beginning, the lack of trust or willingness to capitalize families that are poor, is historically and extremely problematic. We like to decide how people should be able to manage their money, or whether or not they can manage their money, when it's really just a scarcity of money in general that people are facing. And so I don't think that governments were doing so much direct cash assistance, guaranteed income, basic income, these sorts of efforts that are really putting money directly into people's hands and letting them have agency over their finances. And I'll say at the beginning, with even with the rent relief, and when we could only, when finally, when the recovery money became available, we could only pay landlords. It's extraordinarily limiting way of trying to deliver rent relief, when the incentive and the desperation is on the side of the tenants, right, to be able to pay their rent and keep their homes, and landlords could take the money or not take the money, or so by not giving the funds directly to the tenants, and that shifted over time. That was one of the things that we were really struggling with, and had to use private money, right, to be able to just provide that direct cash assistance. But now we're seeing guaranteed income being popular amongst regions, cities, and cash going directly to people. And I think that's one long overdue and really important thing that's been happening lately.
That's great. Thank you. Ruby, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, just one thing I want to add on that from a funder's perspective, kind of related to what Jen's saying. I think I think of that as also risk tolerance and appetite to risk, right? And that all of a sudden changed for a lot of funders, right? And in different ways. It shows up as fast money without restrictions, general operating dollars, right? Like all of a sudden 6 to 8 month cycle to get a grant out the door, like shrunk to 30 days or less. How do we institutionalize those changes and make them norms so that, we're able to actually be flexible, fast gap capital that Jen's talking about, be that bridge capital, so that, when that government money or long-term permanent financing comes in, it's a seamless transition versus constantly having to scrape for every dollar, right? I think of that too, in terms of, with the partnership with the Bay's Future, we invested 10 million first loss capital into, actually 40 million first loss capital, 30 into one pot, 10 into a side pot. Anyway, but that enabled that fund to pull in other funders. Jen and Destination Home is actually playing the same role for the Community Housing Partnership Fund. So I think more folks, and that was kind of unseen or unheard of before, and all of a sudden that became really doable. Same thing with, like, I think about things like Project Home Key, buying up hotels and turning them into permanent supportive housing. It's not that crazy of an idea, right? Like, it's kind of like, a lot of advocates for a long time have been talking about government buying up properties and that as a strategy. And now all of a sudden that became possible. Red tape was cut, right? It was much easier to entitle and flip that into SRO housing or other forms of homeless housing, permanent supportive. So I think those type of things, that especially the stuff that doesn't seem so sexy, but is extremely important to grease the wheels for change, is something that, and with the risk tolerance thing too, like I'd love to see continue through past this pandemic.
I mean, did you ever think streamlining would be so sexy?
I I mean, I think, Ruby, I can say from our experience at Genentech, the importance of the role that CZI played in that de-risking of the initial investment in the partnership. We were an early corporate funder, but I think being able to see that there was real money and that there had been real due diligence done to a point where we were able to say this is a fast-moving thing that we want to be a part of. There are lots of different roles for funders to play. I maybe want to connect back actually to this notion of sort of rental protection policies, this sort of piece of focus on tenants, Jennifer, that you were speaking about, and maybe bridge to this notion also of how corporations engage. I mean, I think we're in a moment where we are really seeing that need to be thinking about the leaky tub, if you will, of housing, where we have families falling out of housing much faster than we're able to bring people back in, and the challenge that poses, and the need to think systemically, which there was this opportunity to do. I mean, there was a greater need, but an opportunity to really focus on that through policies that are now largely, I think, expired or coming to an end soon if they're not across the bay in terms of, rental support, in terms of eviction protection. So what does that mean for now? And I would also sort of make that a two-parter if we can, and say to the folks in this room, how might companies also lean in here as a place where they can make a difference?
I think that's such a good question. First, let's talk about some of the data that we're hearing. We're hearing a lot about evictions and monitoring evictions, and I'll say that in the community of people that are most vulnerable, oftentimes families don't make it even to eviction court. And so just measuring that one place is not going to be an adequate representation of who's in trouble. In fact, in the universe of like the 18,000 families that received cash assistance from our effort over the 18 months, it was something like 30 or 40% didn't even have a traditional lease, didn't know who their landlord was. A similar percentage couldn't access or use technology, so like applying through a state portal or a one-way thing that wasn't going to work. And so I think when we create these efforts, we should be solving for the most vulnerable situations and not kind of the mainstream situations. And so as we come out of this, what we're going to find is families are still, because they make way under what they should to be able to afford rent here. It's not going to get solved just because the pandemic is over, because they got one-time rent relief. They're going to need help in perpetuity. They're going to need help like rental subsidies, and oftentimes even one-time cash assistance is a huge benefit for families. And this prevention system that is happening in Santa Clara County is happening in other parts of the Bay, where your groups on the ground are meeting with families and providing direct cash assistance. In Santa Clara County, oh my God, I'm so sorry. In Santa Clara County, it's about $5,000 to prevent a family from becoming homeless. That's not that much money, and that is an excellent use of private resources.
Yes, just to double down on what Jen is saying, and to your earlier point, Jen, about trusting people, seeing people as seeing renters, seeing low-income people as people that just deserve something like universal basic income, that we don't have to create this intense bureaucracy to deliver rental assistance, that people, this was sort of an innovation, if you will. What we saw in the crisis is just deliver cash to people so that they can create some foundation from which to work. And then just have that stability in their lives from there.
Yeah. So I'm hearing, did I mute myself again? Yes, no, I'm not, I'm good. I'm hearing some powerful themes around the power of streamlining. I think around also recognizing the limitations of the data that we, I can say as a corporate funder, we lean into the data a lot frequently, like what is the proven problem, and the limitations that we have in measuring that, Jen, that you just spoke of, like we're really not even capturing the need often in the tools that we have to measure. I think I want to go back to a stat that I think it might have been you, Jen, around this piece of the degree to which the significant disproportion of households that are falling into homelessness, being BIPOC. And this moment again for us to be thinking about for, and I'm going to say for the funders in this room, what does that mean for how we should be thinking sort of in this intersectional space about the harms that are happening, as well as the ways in which we might engage to fund in a more powerful way?
I mean, the pandemic only brought to the surface what's been true all along, right? There's a underfunding of organizations led by people of color. There's an underfunding of communities of color, and a lot of systemic barriers to people having access to basic needs, and especially housing. And so some of the more powerful things that I saw philanthropy do over the 18 months was what Ruby was talking about. The flexible way of conveying resources, of not getting so entrenched in sort of like these normal rules of expectations over resources that are really should be viewed as community resources, right? If it's a foundation money, or it's there should be sitting with community and figuring out what the needs are, listening to the people who are most proximate to the suffering or who are currently suffering, and taking direction from them. When we started our cash aid effort, we met with dozens and dozens of community leaders who then talked to hundreds of families, and they were very clear. They said, we need money. We need it not to be labeled anything having to do with our status. So we don't want to call it an undocu fund or anything like that. We want to be able to we want you to help as many of our neighbors as you can. And we want to work with people we trust. We don't want to have to go to an unknown system to get help. We want to go to the neighborhood place where we already go. And that turned into funding 70 different organizations that were microscopic, meaning they might not even have a paid staff person. They might not have had a full-time staff person, but they knew they're part of the community, and they knew who was suffering, and they had relationships. And so worked with them to find very easy ways to convey resources. Things for unbanked people like debit cards, right? That could be reloaded, or transfers, or whatever the different ways that people needed to receive the cash, but really do it in a way that we were instructed, not in the way that we thought was best, right? And that's when we learned about how limiting technology really is, even in the Bay. How people don't have the basic things like the lease agreement, that was necessary right at the beginning. Again, things morphed over time, but we started off this effort and it was really difficult for people to access resources.
Yeah, a couple different streams of thoughts are coming to mind for me, but one is around, in terms of your question too, on how folks can help, is understanding where in the ecosystem too you want to play. And it could be all, right? But for example, focusing on kind of direct service, immediate needs, helping people now, right? Which is kind of more that direct cash assistance and stuff, super powerful, easy to do, low risk, all of that great stuff. There's more prevention style work, right? Like that both Destination Home, All Home is also doing, run by Tamika Moss, and a few other orgs in the Bay that we support. What Jen mentioned also about supporting more orgs led of color, that is a huge issue in the Bay Area and beyond. Right? Like we say, we're so progressive, but the reality is that most of nonprofits are run by white folks, in particular white women. And so it becomes this thing of how do we diversify the field, and how do we also listen to the field to see what they actually need versus finding organizations that align with us and say that's the thing we want. And one of the ways that we've done that is actually supporting a suburban regional organizing project that groups came to us and were like, we're losing in the suburbs, right? And we need to organize in the suburbs. And it was a lot of white-led orgs. And then they had a really deep internal dialogue about, what that means for the work that we're doing when it's not representative of the folks that they're trying to reach and target and talk about. And so they themselves are kind of shifting into what that looks like and how to get more diversity in that table. And it's been great because we just get the easy job of, writing a check, and then they get to figure it out. But I think this is also where we overcomplicate things, to Jen's point of here's all the metrics and deliverables. How about we just give some money to groups to figure it out and then come back to us to tell us what, how they want to move forward. Another thing too, that I've been thinking about more is moving away from, it's good to be focused on outcomes and shared outcomes, right? But also who are the orgs in the space that you want to build up or that you want to invest in and partner with more deeply. And I kind of think of orgs in a way of like agitator, innovator, and orchestrator. And we need all three, right? And some orgs play all three roles, and some orgs kind of specialize in one. Like I would say an all home is really an orchestrator. And then even maybe a little bit of an innovator. I would say Destination Home kind of can play all three roles sometimes. So it's been a little bit easier sometimes to say, okay, well, what's missing in this space? We really need, we maybe don't need as much agitators. Everyone knows housing and homelessness is a big issue. It's a top issue for voters. Like maybe we actually need to invest more in orchestrators, right? That are pulling people together, that are figuring out how to spend resources in a collective way, that are threading the needle between different issue areas. And so as a funder, sometimes I'm trying to move us more away from like, how many units did we build or whatever, into like, how are we supporting the ecosystem to flourish, and who do we want to make big bets on so that they can do the work.
I'm hearing as well a really, I think, a beautiful expanded frame for things that funders can look at and towards as we're thinking about how to be making, some sort of impact in this space. So when we came to this, it really was about the 3 Ps, like that's what we got to do, and the big emphasis on policy. And I'm hearing more and more around how to be reaching deep into communities, which is challenging sometimes for corporate donors. So who are the connectors, orchestrators, as you've talked about, who have that commitment? So these are questions that funders can start asking and thinking about. Who are the organizations that seem to be doing what you're describing, Ruby, really having deep power sharing with communities, real curiosity, operating with trust, some operating principles that might be different than I think what we would have looked to 18 months ago.
And a slower pace of change. Like, I think, people have said, right, what is that? Change moves at the speed of trust. Did I get that wrong? Yeah. So I just also think another big adjustment is like, you're not going to see results in a year that you want to see, you know what I mean? Like, it's just adjusting expectations, I think, a little too.
Yeah. So I want to just pause for a moment and see, I think we've got a couple comments coming in. We've got a pretty phenomenal group of women here who are engaged in housing. So I just want to remind folks that you may ask questions. I will continue to ask a few questions, but would love to get a question from the audience if, free consultation, if nothing else. So I think
I wanted to add a thought on the racial equity.
Thanks.
Pulling out a little bit, the history of housing has all these problematic policies, redlining, segregation, predatory lending, exclusions in the New Deal, exclusions in the GI Bill. And so let's just be clear about that. And so our interventions have to come from understanding that history. I'll make the plug again for preservation. Jen, I heard you say that 95% of the families you worked with identified as BIPOC. In preservation, we financed 11 projects in preservation. From the data that we have so far, also 95% of the tenants identify as BIPOC. And so it's just so stark that supporting people where they already live, helping them find security where they already live, bringing those buildings under rent restrictions, it's a strategy that maybe doesn't get you quite the number of units. Like, you're not going to find a building that's 100 units. You're probably going to find a building that's 8 units, 11 units, 15 units. But then that investment really is an investment in racial equity.
Thanks, Cindy. We've got a question I'm going to read from Lindsay Marks from City or San Jose. Great question, I think, really around the impact of the pandemic on youth and foster care and transitional age youth, and whether it has been harder for these, particularly vulnerable groups to stay housed. Does anybody want to take a crack at that? Trends we've seen for transitional age youth or foster youth.
I think that is a great question, Lindsay, and I don't know. I don't know the answer. I will say this. There's been a few specifically in Santa Clara County We opened a few different emergency or transitional housing specifically for transition age youth during the pandemic. Covenant House has joined our community, opened a transitional site in the city of Santa Clara. Raising the Bar, which is a homeless youth-led, peer-led organization. If you haven't heard of Raising the Bar, you should check them out with a Z, Raising. They opened a home in downtown San Jose for kids, and they were having a little trouble actually filling the vacancies. I think that's an anecdotal comment that I'm making, but it would be interesting to understand what the trends are from people that are experts in that space.
Thanks for that question. I think another thing that we talked about, and Ruby, you alluded to and mentioned Bar High as an example, is this notion of the intersectionality of housing. Housing as a healthcare issue, housing as it interrelates with so many other spaces and places. What have you and your organizations learned about ways in which we can take that intersectional approach?
Great question. I think we're still learning, to be honest. I think one thing in particular is housing is both a means and an ends, right? Like you cannot begin to work on any kind of economic mobility or stability without a safe, accessible place to call home, right? And so it's both the means in which you need to get to the outcome, which really the outcome is prosperous, inclusive, thriving communities, right? We want everyone to be able to achieve economic mobility and stability in their life. And housing, I think, is a cornerstone to that, almost like the social determinants to health, right? In the way that we think about that. And so I think more so how we're thinking about how to weave that in now through everything is one, just through language. Sometimes that is really a big helpful way to say, why housing? Why does this matter? Why does this lead to other outcomes? Why invest in this versus something else, right? And then also to invest more in coalitions that are multi-issue. So instead of always focusing on just like housing or homelessness, I mean, even like, let's be honest, there's even, a schism a bit between housing and homelessness. Like part of the conversation has been just how do we marry those two things better? And I think we're doing a better job at that. But also like, okay, how do we invest in coalitions that represent criminal justice reform, housing, and health, right? Or like, what are those existing intersections? Because it almost feels like a chicken and the egg issue where like some groups purposefully focus in on things because that's where the money is, right? And they have to do things that they can fund their group. And a lot of funders like you to be really specific and like focused. And to be broad is sometimes feels like it's kind of hard to track, right? And so I think part of this is just changing funder behavior too, in terms of encouraging intersectionality where possible, and supporting your grantees and figuring that out, because I think we're still kind of learning.
There was, Ruby mentioned it, but, the power of a home, especially for somebody who's been struggling on the streets. There was a study done by the Benioff Housing and Homelessness Institute. Caitlin's been so good at finding studies, so maybe she'll find this one. It's called Project Welcome Home. And it looked at a cohort of the most fragile, health vulnerable people that have overutilized the justice and the health systems in Santa Clara County. Housing First model supportive housing was provided, and how the other domains got better, right? When people were housed, their health got better. They had less intersections with the criminal justice system, and look at how smart you are. Yeah. A lot of things changed as a result of that housing. And people, I think that those buckets maybe on my side, we're not doing a good enough job braiding those things together and make in a way that makes sense for funders. But I also think that we're short-sighted if we're thinking about getting involved in housing, if it's just this one particular domain, right? Because there's been study after study that shows that how all of the things shift for the good. And also on the opposite side, I would say that in our homelessness prevention system in normal time, the precursors for people needing our help, one was an ELI income earning household, like 86% of the time. So that's always a constant, which is why I always talk about extremely low income housing. But then the other two reasons that people were becoming homeless, one was intersection with the criminal justice system in the past, and the other was a previous homelessness experience, right? And so you can either, I guess, address it in the front end or address it on the back end. But if you aren't providing the basic stability of a home, all these other things get worse.
Yeah, So really housing is just a cornerstone to everything, foundational or playing a disproportionate role potentially in driving outcomes for the better or for the worse for individuals and families. I think that's really powerful. We were really compelled by that as well.
And it's a hard role for philanthropy because it's so expensive, right? To build a house or to build 100 units. And that's where what Cindy is doing has been so powerful, and what Ruby has been doing, and what the work around these lower interest loan making, where funders can all join into a fund. They don't have to foot the bill for every, for a project on your own, $50 million or something, right? But when everyone is chipping in, then it's how you can get to this. And the work that Cindy has been doing with the Community Housing Fund, I mean, it's been instrumental in terms of leveraging our Measure A housing bond in Santa Clara County. I think we have gobbled up how much, maybe 50 million of the fund so far and counting, because we had other sources of leverage. So again, this private money gets matched, and then it doesn't seem so daunting and impossible to do it.
So
I wanted to lift up the intersectionality of how we work with each other too. So in supporting, especially the BIPOC-led developers, LIST can be very transparent about how we look at underwriting. We can push ourselves actually to be even more open and less tied to what I'll call traditional banking ways of looking at risk. So that's looking at the developers, but then looking at the investors or philanthropy or corporate partners, really talking expansively about the impact that we want to have, kind of like we've been doing in this conversation, and to be focused on what's real risk and what's perceived risk, and can we both lessen our feelings about perceived risk? Can we debunk that? And then whatever we determine is real risk, let's find a way to share it amongst everyone, like Jen is saying, so that we can be bolder, be braver, and be more impact focused as we make our investments.
Cindy, I think that awareness of the structural and underpinnings of inequity is really helpful alongside that conversation of risk. Good sort of piece of an actual recognition of what's happening on the ground and the reasons why, I think can really open minds and doors. I'm cognizant that we have just a few minutes left, and I want to take a one last question for everybody to just do a quick thought. Jen, you kind of tiptoed us into this and talking about sort of the investment point. I think it can be daunting as a new funder to this space. Like, how do you solve housing? It's too much money. How can I possibly get involved? How can I make a difference? And I would say, what is the call to action that you would give to this group at this moment in time? And I'm going to just specifically say, for those people who are thinking about, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do next? What would you say very quickly, each of you, to this audience?
I would say every $5,000 keeps another family from becoming homeless. So short term, not a heavy lift, homelessness prevention is a great investment. And it would super meaningful to families right now. There's not going to be a better time than right now as we're coming out of these protections to go all in on making sure less families are on the streets, because it is only going to cause not only the suffering for the families that are going to be enduring, but a lot of problems for everybody, right? If we are flooding the system with more and more people on the streets.
And Jen, just quickly, that's something Destination Home is doing. Are there other organizations you might highlight in other regions? If I'm new to the space and I want to find out where I can put my money to invest in that kind of work, anyone you want to name today?
Yeah, so Destination Home does this in the South Bay. All Home has been incubating a prevention system in some of the other counties in the Bay. Mission Asset Fund was a leader in providing direct cash assistance in San Mateo during the pandemic. And I'm not sure, Ruby or Cindy might know, San Francisco proper. I know Catholic Charities was doing some of this too.
I'm aware that I'm actually almost out of time. 30 seconds, Cindy, and 30 seconds, Ruby, and I got to do the closing comments here real quick.
Yes. More flexible money, more low cost money, and think about pairing your philanthropic giving with looking at your corporate treasury. And if they're willing to make a investment, that can really be powerful.
Awesome. Ruby?
Big plus one to that. I think thinking about non-grant investments could also be a great way to recycle money and keep things going for the long term. The other thing that I would just mention is some kind of almost alternative models too, like CLESPA is great. They're East Bay Legal Aid Center that focuses both on policy. They can do undocumented immigrants too. So they're a really useful org in that way. Bay Area Legal Aid, ED-PREC. It's another Black female owned and operated organization that focuses on community land trust type models, but they're like an LLC. So they're a really great alternative that's focused in Oakland. And then I would also just mention Oak CLT. That's another great organization that's doing kind of preservation, acquisition, and community land trust in Oakland.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to the three of you. This has been really kind of exhilarating and thought-provoking, and I just want to voice my appreciation for all the work that each of you are doing across our community. It's super important. For those of you who are attending, we have invite you to head back to Swap Card to enjoy DJ Lady Ryan, and the plenary session is kicking off at noon, where you'll hear from NCG CEO Dwayne Marsh and Heather McGee, world-known advocate for justice and author of The Sum of Us: What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. So we will see you there, and thank you for joining us today.